stories I'd like to tell. I've been collecting these stories for well over 10 years. I would write them down when I heard them or was reminded of them. And the quest I've been on lately is to try to weave them together. My ultimate goal is to make them a narrative. But there's much that lends itself to a tapestry instead. That story about Mississippi doesn't lend itself very easy to the day-to-day life on the island. But I'm trying, I'm trying. There's a couple of quotes that I'd like to give you. One that was an inspiration to me. It was told of Mark Twain. After he had become the best-selling author in the United States, he made his way back as a middle-aged man back to Hannibal, Mississippi. And it was there that he received the inspiration that resulted a few years later in Tom Sawyer, and a decade later into what many people consider the classic of American literature, Huck Finn. When he came back and went to Elmira, New York, where he spent his summers, and began to write those pages that would eventually become Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, he made a note in his journal that rings so true to me. He said, "All the summer world was bright and fresh, and the sun rose upon my tranquil world and beamed down like a benediction. The fountains of my great deep are broken up, and I have reigned many reminiscences for 4 and 20 hours. The old life has swept before me like a panorama. The old days have trooped by me in their old glory again, and old faces have looked out of the midst of the past. Old footsteps have sounded in my listening ears. Old hands have clasped mine. Old voices have greeted me, and the songs I loved ages and ages ago have come wailing down the centuries." I can relate to what Mark Twain wrote then. I feel those old hands. I see those old faces. I hear those old songs. I grew up in a world that was defined by a home and a family, the extended families that became neighborhoods, and that molded together became the Harkers Island that I knew and loved. In the work that I'm trying to do, there is a sacred place of honor reserved for old people. I was the last generation whose daily entertainment was not television or even radio. It was sitting around listening to people tell stories. Old people had more stories than anybody else. And because of that, they had a place of honor that they have somehow lost in the world we know today. I love those old people: Cliff, Ernest, Turl, Calvin, Grace, Ollie, Carrie, Polly. They occupied a place of honor and reverence. Their stories bound us to the past that was theirs and ours. There were men, many of them old, who caused us to know what the world that they knew had been like, with both their stories and their examples. My children came to know me because I tried to be part of their world. I went to their ball games, their recitals, their programs at school. It was a whole lot different in my youth. I knew my father in his world, not mine. I got to know him on the dock, at the shore, in the boat, on the oyster rock, in the clam bed. It was his world that I came to know him. In many ways, the men were more important to us than the mothers. The fathers we were with them more than the mothers. The mothers were at home. We spent all day with the men of our world. They were our examples. They were, in the words of Wendell Barrett, the author of Jayber Crow, they were rememberers, carrying in their living thoughts all the history that a place like Harkers Island has ever had. I listened to them with all my ears and have tried to remember what they said. Though from remembering what I remember, I know that much has been lost. Things went to the grave with them that will never be known again. There were the people, and there were the stories. And my book is about the people and their stories. Learning to write here at Harkers Island Elementary and at East Carteret and East Carolina, I developed a style that at time, and that's why I need Karen and others to help me, it goes from being a reporter to a historian. But I realize that people appreciate most when I'm a storyteller. And so what I've tried to do is tell some stories about Loomis Willis, who moved so many times that when his chickens saw him coming, they rolled over and crossed their legs. About Lope Rose, who loved stewed loon so much that after he finished the loon and the dumplings, he put his hand down in the pot and then rubbed it through his hair. There was Donald Guthrie, who while in boot camp for World War II, after having run horses and sheep and cattle as a young man, when the drill instructor stopped after 10 miles to give him a rest, Donald went up with his legs still pumping and said, "We ain't going to get nowhere if you stop every 10 miles." There was Barbershop Louie, who stuttered when he talked, but he made his point in an unforgettable way. There was Lion Willie, whose name told you all you needed to know about him. There was Dallas Daniel, who scared the Eggman so bad that he left the island and never came back. There was Prince the dog, who had a charge account at 2 different stores. There was Luther Willis, the World War I doughboy, who used to hold the cork line while I held the lead line on Calvin and Neil's boat, and who talked 40 years later, gasping for air, because his lungs had been seared in the fields of eastern France, and would say, "Help me, Jolly boy, I ain't been the same since France." There were Snowball and Loomis, who coached the first ever Little League baseball team, and they had no patience for a mercy rule. They felt the best way to get mercy was to play good enough that no one had to give it to you. There was Wilson Davis, who heard the fans at Salterpath swear that ball was high. There's a story behind that you could hear from someday. There was Danny Boy Lewis, Brady's son, who said he knew twice as much as his father because he knew everything he knew and he knew everything that he himself knew. There was Mary Willis, who told the people waiting in line at the welfare office that they looked like a bunch of damn seagulls. There was the young boy from the island, and I could tell you his name, but I'll reserve it, who went to register for the draft. And when Ruby Holland asked him if he were a communist, he thought for a moment. He said, "No, I'm common, I'll grant you." But then he mentioned another name and said, "But he's probably the calmest man I know." There was my Uncle Louie, who pulled up his tomato plants because they were growing so fast they kept him awake at night. And there was my Uncle Telford, who taunted a loan that he missed by saying, "Fly, damn you, but you'll freeze to death this winter."